All right, we're gonna do some mech variants here, and I'm gonna start with the it's a base body for all intents and purposes, but smooth it all out. And I don't remember if I borrow any elements from this or not, but so we're gonna take basically a base body suit with the base female head, and we're gonna do some mechanical variants to her. In this case, I'm going to be doing poly painting, so I'm going to go ahead and sketch out the breakup. I don't really do this anymore, but maybe I should start again. I don't know. If it works for you, it works. Kind of sketching out a bodysuit. And again, this is just standard brush, RGB, intensity on instead of Z add. Lazy mouse on or off, whatever makes it easier for you to draw on your sketch. And this might save you some headache of having to, you know, do a bunch of sculpting just to find out you don't really like it. So it's easier to kind of go in here and sample. You can sample by hitting C, hover over any part of the mesh you want to sample from, hit C, and then I'll sample white, and then you can just paint back over. As well as if your line work's getting a little bit heavy, you can go into, like I just did there, a white and then color fill with an RGB intensity of like 30 and just hit that a couple times to kind of dumb down some areas. So you kind of sketch on your lines and then you kind of reform them. And if you're really slick, you could go in and paint these things and then mask by RGB intensity under your masking options and then use that to extract, but I think what I end up doing is just retopologizing and making a mesh that way. Or you could use the topology brush. This is a very old version of ZBrush. Well, not very old, but relatively old. It's been a while. This is an old video. I'd say a couple years old at least. So you won't be seeing any Z-modeler stuff. But if I see something that's obviously like, oh, use this new tool instead of what I'm doing here, then I'll shout that out if I think of it. And if you know you're doing form-fitting things, you know, you could also go ahead and just start painting on RGB and materials if you really wanted to, even though it's just a sketch. Like I said before, this is something I'm just trying this time. You'll see in my other videos where I usually just start sculpting. But this is interesting. This was an interesting kind of different way to do things. And now you could use any number of things to retopologize this. I chose these spheres because it's usually easier for me to kind of go in and plot points than it is for me to use the topology brush or mask and extract and clean up, which is it's not hard to do, but this just gives me a little bit of extra control for all the different pieces I want to do. So this would probably still do the same way, I guess. It doesn't take that long. I mean, this isn't real time, this is obviously sped up, but it's a pretty quick process. Now there's going to be different layers here, so I've got to, and this, you know, working clean in this way and kind of planning it out first, it takes a little longer up front than just getting in there and starting to sculpt, but, you know, it could save you time down the line when you've already got everything already kind of modeled in and it's already a nice sub-D mesh that you can start detailing up and it's all clean and you don't have to go through and do the whole sketch refine, form refine kind of rebuild process if you can just kind of do it to start with. You know, I'm trying to put some straps on her legs here, as opposed to going and resurfacing those. So that's basically a curve insert brush. And this was before ZModeler, so you just gotta hide. Do any, you can still do this. You can, anything that's visible, you can crease, and then you can subdivide. There's no dynamic subdies here, but we still have subdivision history, which will work for our purposes. But yeah, if you do a curve insert curve brush, and you go off, you start drawing on the mesh, and then you go off the mesh and hold on shift, it should wrap around the mesh. So that's what I did for the straps on the legs. Here I am creasing and subdividing. And of course all the layers are going to be pretty flat, even if you do give them some skin thickness and your adaptive skin mesh when you make your Z-sphere topology. But it's easy enough just to take one surface of that, one polygroup of that, and kind of pull it out and give it a little bit more thickness to kind of undulate the forms a little bit more, give it a little bit more variation between the underneath cloth versus the over cloth versus the big pads versus the straps. And it looks like I replaced those straps with just solid cylinders just to make them a little bit easier to work with. As the things change around the legs, it's easier to kind of pull a solid cylinder around than it is like a thin little strap. So that's the only reason I did that. But if you got a strap that works, go ahead and do that. And it looks like I sliced the head off her base mesh and went ahead and filled holes. I got a separate head mesh that I'm going to go and do some bodysuit type build-up stuff. Start giving her a little bit of a helmet treatment. And instead of sculpting on a bunch of stuff, I'm trying out doing a lot more insert stuff. They both have their strengths and weaknesses, but depending on the look you're going for, it might be a lot more useful to do a bunch of insert stuff than sitting there sculpting piece after piece and then having to break that up later like I explained before. This is just masking, inflating, H-polish, clay brush, standard brush. That looked like a little bit of a dam standard with the alt held down to kind of pull those forms out, clay build up, kind of dig those back down. And that was basically mask, make a poly group, and then do a form refine. You could also do groups loops. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, make a mask, poly group at Control W, and then use the geometry, edge loops, groups loops options, and that'll give you, and you can turn polish up or down. If you don't want it to polish, you can turn it all the way down to 0, and then it'll give you a nice 4 rings that you can pop off any interior surface, and you can transpose model that or whatever you want to do to kind of get nice clean shapes going. That's a technique that, make sure Tom Paul uses a lot, and look him up. I cycled through a bunch of helmets there. Just stuff that I saw on CG Hub and just modeled them out real quick, sketched them out, and used those as kind of inspiration or ideas, just to kind of throw them up there and kind of look at them and go, does that work? Anything cool I can take from this, or does it spark anything? I can use a 3D model to do that, and obviously have your 2D reference up as well. But if you have a 3D model you want to throw in there and kind of get ideas from, go for it. 80s shades look, max headroom. And I'm kind of experimenting with just more angular clip shapes. Kind of see if I can find something cool in here. And of course I keep clipping it down and clipping it down so much that it eventually just turns back into nothing. So start over, try again. And of course you have undo history, so if you want to scroll back through and start at an earlier point or whatever, you can certainly do that, but it seemed like I had something I kind of liked. And of course, once you make a shape, you can mirror and weld it. You can flip it vertically, mirror it vertically, and try, different stuff. Use your clip brushes. And as you're refining the shape from one side with clip brushes, you can go to the other side, and it makes a pretty big difference. I'm on the profile view, and I clip it back to kind of match the face. And when I go to the front, you see a big flat plane that I kind of liked. And then, of course, if you want to, you can make that more organic, and it's not a flat plane anymore, but you can just kind of move a soft move brush, kind of bulb that out a little bit. Or you can go in here with trim smooth border and make it flat again. And you'll see there on the flat surfaces, you want to make sure you go into brush auto masking on the left-hand side there, and backface mask, turn that on if you're going through thinner meshes. And this is just kind of using trim smooth border with a square alpha, which I usually use for modeling rocks, but it can do some interesting things if you're trying to just get some nice rigid hard edge detail as well. Just kind of searching for forms and shapes. This is a ton of exploration in this video, but eventually you might find something you like, and then you can start going in and refining and adding your screw ports and standard brush, damn standard brush to cut up your panels and go from there. And you see I was over there playing with clay polish. If you do have simpler forms, you can use clay polish to kind of sometimes polish your surfaces, and you can actually turn polish on when you're dynameshing. I usually leave that stuff off, but it's there if you can get it to work for you. And I usually use the helmet to kind of inform the rest of the body. I mean, ideally you'd be working all over the mesh all at once, but if you're having trouble, like I was, figuring out exactly how you want things to work together, or what you're even making, what style you're even going for, I usually spend that time on the helmet and then have that dictate what goes on the body. So I started with trim smooth border, which is very, very harsh transitions, but can yield some very interesting shapes. And then I'll go back through with trim dynamic, which is a little more controllable, a little bit softer. And then I'll really refine it with H polish if I need to. And then standard brush and Damien standard brush to kind of cut it up a little bit more. And then using the slice like I did to kind of cut pieces apart and kind of move them around so that they're kind of together, but working together, but separate pieces. And this is still obviously super loose, just kind of exploring. So if I wanted to pull any big shapes out or curve any big shapes, warp anything or insert anything and dynamesh it all down together, I could certainly do that. in here. You can watch me struggling with the topology brush. I've gotten a little bit better at it, but it's always one of those things that I still kind of don't really have a really good knack for. Finally going and retouching the neck here, which I kind of left alone for a while. Figure out, and that's a really popular thing, is a sternomastoid neck thing. Sternomastoid neck hinges or neck hydraulics that kind of mimic the anatomy underneath. And again, still exploring, you know, I'm not getting too caught up in final stuff, but here's where you could do a groups loops or polish by features on a polygroup. Groups loops would probably be a better case for this particular one if you're doing girder reinforcement type stuff. It'll keep your edges and your corners nice and crisp, as opposed to polish by features, which will kind of soften those transitions. So, which I ended up doing polish by features, which looking back probably shouldn't have, but do what I say, not what I do. And you'll probably recognize some pieces of this from concept art you've seen around. And I'm just kind of playing with, you know, I probably got that reference up, and I'm just playing with making the shapes and making it work within the confines of what I'm doing here. See if I can't get it to work. If I can't, no big deal. It's still sketchy, but and got rid of one side of it, so I can go ahead and use a clip brush to kind of clean it up, and then I can just do a quick mirror and weld to get the other side back. And I'm kind of noodling it a little bit more than I usually do. I don't know. Just, you know, this is an old video, so just kind of watching myself now, I'm kind of being like, I don't really noodle this much when I concept, but, you know, I don't really concept it that much anymore, so I don't know. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Like I said before in some of the other videos, I might be concepting at a little bit too low of a dynamic resolution. If I kind of want to skip the sketch refine stage, I can dynamesh at a higher resolution and still not be too bogged down in refining when I'm just kind of sketching things out. So kind of pick and choose how much work you want to do up front versus rebuilding versus building it nice the first time, but also losing the ability to kind of explore. So as you get experience, you'll kind of be able to decide a little bit better what you should do first and second and third, and see if you can skip some steps along the way. But you don't know unless you try. And since I know I'm going to have a base body in there, and I'm not going to be doing any mech sculpting on her face, I can go ahead and just pop this piece out and have it separate. And this is the thing that I probably don't do enough of, is to get a bunch of pieces in there and try to get them to work without just sitting there and sculpting, but just pieces to kind of get them to work together and kind of piece them together and sculpt them individually as opposed to sculpting it first and then breaking them apart. So I should probably explore that a little bit more than I actually do. And if I can think of them off the top of my head, I'm sure the stuff I'm looking at was like Mike Nash, the Furio, Tedeschi, who else? You know, it was all the usual suspects. You know, a couple years ago when I was doing this, and still now, you know, I still have their stuff up. Obviously, if I'm doing mech-related stuff that's kind of in that vein of detail and patterns and stuff, and of course anything else too. You know, aviator helmets from the military and weird, cool stuff. The usual. And just giving the that plastic neck wall a little bit of reinforcement. And you'll notice if you're using the clip rectangle and the clip circle and you want to clip away, you want to make sure you hit Alt, of course, and you also want to make sure that plus sign isn't over any of your mesh, or it's going to force it to match the border of your clip brush as opposed to clipping away the border. Just some clip brush basics. Keep going through and hiding all the lower body pieces whenever I show everything again. What I would do now is just polygroup, you know, Control W on all those subtools, merge them all together, just with merge down or merge visible, and reappend and delete the other ones, or probably just merge down. And then they're all together, but I can always group split them apart later on. It just keeps it a little bit easier than having to go through and hide all that stuff all at once. I don't know what's going on back here, but it looks complicated. And like I said, this is way more noodly. You know, at the sketch phase, I don't usually get this noodly. It's like, okay, get all the forms all over the body built up, and then go in and worry about all this stuff. But looks like back then I was a little more noodly out of the box. And this is before Z-Modeler, so don't laugh at me. I'm making do with the stuff I had at the time. A lot of this stuff would be a lot easier just being able to, you know, just model it in ZBrush with the Z-Modeler. Looks like a one-off insert piece. I guess I can turn into an insert mesh brush, and then there's another thing when you're using insert mesh brush is you can turn on, let's see if I do it here. Give it a little space to sit in. And then the projection strength under modifiers, you can actually have it conform to your mesh. And of course, if you have a Dynamesh, if you decimated it and it didn't have enough resolution, it's going to kind of crinkle as it deforms. So I had to add some more resolution to get it to conform to the underlying mesh first. But that's a cool trick to know, I guess. Keep it in mind. And this wasn't for anything in particular, just kind of messing around with, trying to see stuff and recreate stuff in ZBrush quickly and get a feel for the new tools and have fun doing it. And that's the trim hole. So you can just, it's camera oriented, so if you face your camera directly at where you want it, you can just use trim hole to drill a hole straight back or straight out at you, whether or not you're holding down Alt. And already starting to put in screws. Yeah, it's a lot more noodly than I usually am. But of course, just insert brush screw.